For over 30 years, I've made a fantastic living from sports betting, and I've helped many others become millionaires by doing exactly the same. Beating the sports books isn't about luck, it's about knowing the game. Stick with me, and by the end of this video, you will have the framework to succeed and profit from sports betting. So a bit about myself. I'm Tony from Analyst, and I've been in this game for longer than internet betting was a thing. From getting the first operators licensed in Malta to running data services and high-staking betting syndicates across 14 different countries. I was the first big player to supply liquidity to the betting exchanges, and I've got many more stories to tell. Now I'm sharing my wealth of experience with you guys on this channel. So if you're ready to learn how to beat the house edge, let's crack on. So most of the followers of this channel are from the US, the UK, Australia and South Africa. So you will know three different types of odds maybe: American, fraction and decimal. Now what I'm going to suggest to you is that you actually learn how to always work with decimal. It is so much easier. But let's just go through this and I'll point out the reasons. So, with America, right, you're always betting for 100. So if you see plus 100, that's what you win when you bet 100. So that would be known as even money in fraction terms. So even money, and in decimal terms, a simple 2. If you took minus 125, that's what you'd have to win. You'd have to bet, to win 100. So that would be odds of 4 to 5. And that would be a decimal 1.80. If you took the positive plus 125, you can see all very simple until now because they're all easily divisible. 5 to 4, and then you'd have decimal 2.25. Now this is where it sort of gets a little bit more sort of complex. Let's just pick odds at random and go with, say, minus 175, right? And that would be equivalent to 4 to 7 fraction. You have to put 7 on to win 4. And in decimal terms, it would be 157. So as you see, that might not be no big deal. You might be good at sort of flipping that through your head and no problem. But here's the sort of punchline. If you ever do parlays, or you're going to start calculating the percent that we're going to get onto shortly, right, then that's where it's going to be much easier to use decimal. So if we just take these last two, 2.25 times 1.57, if I'm right, that is 353. Whoops, 353. It is simple as that, right? So you just times the two together, and it's just simply easier to work. I do apologise, by the way, if the pen is a little bit not as thick as I wanted it to be. I'm afraid I ordered about 50, but this was about the best I got. So that's the story of odds types. Let's move on. Now you'll need a quick understanding now. Odds relate to chance. So let's just take what they call a game of chance. This is where the numbers are set in stone. So for example, in a casino or flip of a coin. So if we did the flip of a coin, it would be 50-50. It would be even money, odds of 2 or plus 100 American that you could guess the right one. If it was a dice, it's obviously got 6 numbers on there. So the chances of hitting 1 would be 5 to 1. Would be odds of 6 in decimal terms or plus 500 in American terms. And if it was a spin around the roulette table where there was 1 white on the table, you know that the chances of it landing on there would be 1 in 37. So that would be 36 to 1 or 37 decimal or plus 3,600 US. That's what you would get. So this is what they call a game of chance. The numbers are, like I said, set in stone. Now with sports betting, it isn't. It's what they call perceived chance. And the reasons for this is because obviously it's going to have to be calculated, right? There is no black and white in sports betting. And it's this that creates the chance for us to profit from sports. So before we get on to the good stuff, the last thing you'll need to know with the numbers is probability. And this is why I suggested using decimal odds earlier, because it's simple, the calculation. You use 100, that's your base, and then you divide it by the odds, and you have the probability, the betting percent. So some quick examples: odds of 2 would be 100 divided by 2, 50%. Divided by 3, if the odds were 3, 33.3%. If it was more complex, 3.5, 28.57%. And then if we went to the odds on, you would see 1.5, you divide that, and it's going to be more than 50%, obviously. So it's 66.67%. The 1.57 that we used earlier, that would be 63.69%, and the 1.3, if you put this into your calculator, 100 divided 1.30 is 76.92%. Now, to work out the bookmaker's edge, the house edge, the sportsbook's house edge, right, let's just take an example. If it was 1.91, 1.91, which would be the traditional handicap, wouldn't it, right? So 100 divided by 1.91 is 52.36%. Now, obviously, you've just got to times this by 2 in this instance, so it's 104.72%. If you wanted something more like a moneyline bet and say, you know, there was a favourite where it was 1.3 with a 3.5, you'd add these two numbers together and you would come to 105.49%. Now, that is what we call the overround. So that is not the house edge. To actually work out the house edge, you just take the 100 and actually introvert it, right? So divided by 104.72, and you can see that the payout then, if it was equally bet, would be 95.5%, right? So that is simple probability, right? I've kept it really simple. Practice yourself, you know, it is something really good that you should be getting into, and if you do, then I'm sure you're going to be much sharper. Learn to think on your feet, and I think that's one of the keys to actually being a profitable gambler. Right, so let's crack on with the good stuff. Let's put the betting odds into 3 different categories, right? So don't forget, they are perceived odds, right? This is not a game of chance, so we don't know the exact odds, so they're perceived. This is what the market is thinking, right? So there is, first of all, true odds. True odds are when there is no advantage for either the sportsbook or the punter. Normally, a sportsbook, this would be number 2, would include what they call the vigorish, the house edge, you know, the juice, right? So they would add something in for themselves. So in the case of a spin of a coin, they would probably offer 1.91 on both sides and guarantee themselves a profit. Now, we as professional punters, we've got to actually attack the third, and that is called EV odds, expected value. This is when we're going to get the advantage. So again, in the spin of a coin, if we was getting 2.10 on each side, we would actually be guaranteed, because we could bet on both sides and win, right? So these are the 3 terms that I need you to know going forward. So let's talk about how and why you can actually profit. Now, bookmakers are in a competition with each other. So as you know, there are hundreds of different bookmakers. It depends where you live, but let's just say that there's actually 20 within your sort of area that you can attack. Now, all these bookmakers are likely to have different odds. So by picking and choosing, by line shopping, you can often find better odds than the true value. The other thing is, odds are continually moving. Now, some bookmakers might be representing their liabilities by moving the lines up or down, but generally speaking, the markets are formed at pinnacle, you know, the sharp books in this world, and then they move up and down accordingly. But the typical everyday bookmaker is very slow at changing the odds, and this is one of your chances. Furthermore, you get to choose when to bet. Don't forget, bookmakers put up a massive offer. You know, their content, they're probably offering 10,000 different types of bets each week. You've only got to pick out the ones that where the odds are in your favor. So just also bear that in mind, because it is a key component. A lot of people don't talk about it, but you get to pick and choose when to bet. They have to offer everything. And one of the other reasons is that some sports books have this bias. You imagine that you're a sports book in a certain area, a certain country, right? And your country is playing a different country. You are likely to keep those odds short on your country, based on the fact that you know where their money is going to be going. It's just like also betting overs. People tend to bet overs, so bookmakers include a bigger margin in the overs than the unders. But of course, they do know that we professional punters are looking the other way, so they're a little bit careful. But these are basically how markets are formed and how you can actually benefit. Now, there are a number of strategies that you can actually incorporate into your betting, and this is going to depend on your experience, you know, what level you're sort of coming in at. So if you want to be an originator, actually find your own bets, right, it could be quite difficult, especially especially for somebody who's inexperienced. You've got to consider you're up against sports books and also betting syndicates, sharp bettors, right? So they are your challengers, so to say. So bear that in mind, don't try to do something that you can't. You could buy in picks, but the problem with that is everybody is chasing the same steam. So at the end of the day, you are not getting any real value out of it. If you have to start taking lower odds than those advertised, you will find that a profitable bettor is actually not making any money. You could do things like a trading on the betting exchanges if they're open to you. Now the thing is with trading, it's quite difficult, it's quite time consuming, so I would only encourage you to take that route if you've got a lot of experience. For the absolute simpletons, the basic stuff is match betting, right? There's a load of software out there to sort of help you get along the way, right? This is actually taking advantage of the bookmakers' bonuses. So when you actually sign up to a bookmaker, if you first time deposit, then they're probably going to match it or at least give you something, and that's what you can take advantage of. Now this is obviously going to depend very much on where you live and what type of bookmakers' bonuses you can get. Match betting, though, it is limited. I wouldn't necessarily encourage it, especially if you want to be in this game for the long term. And then you've got arbitrage betting. I'm sure you like the sound of that because there is no risk whatsoever. If you're betting, like I mentioned, on both sides of that coin at odds of 2.10, you're actually guaranteed to profit, right? So you can't possibly lose if you do arbitrage betting correctly. The only thing is with arbitrage bettors, they tend to give a lot of value back. So an arbitrage bet on that spin of a coin, they would bet one side at 2.2, but they would still cover themselves on the other side at 1.95. Now the 1.95 is below the true odds, and that brings me on to the next one, which is value betting. Now value betting is what I highly recommend, and the reasons for that are because it's relatively simple. It's just one click, right? There's loads of software to get you started. I'm going to suggest one to you in a minute, but more to the point, it's the most valuable. You can build something intrinsical, long-term, and actually profit big time from value betting. Some guys are making 100,000 a month purely from value betting, and if you can get the accounts, you can keep it going. So value betting is what I would recommend. So the obvious question is, how can you actually find the value bets? Now here's the thing, it's going to obviously depend on your level and your sort of expertise, and not only that, it depends how much money you've got in your pockets, because at some stage you're going to have to probably start paying for software that's going to actually provide you this stuff. So that is actually the first one, right? Software. The only thing is, when you are looking for sort of generalized software, you've got to be a little bit sort of wary, a little bit skeptical, and building a little bit of margin extra, because they are taking these general odds, right? So they're taking odds from all these different sports books together and then pumping out the average, removing the actual vigorish, the juice, and then passing it on to you as benchmark odds that you need to beat, right? So even though the system is a little bit flawed, you will profit if you put in enough of an edge, but I would definitely suggest that you sort of treat it with a little bit of caution. What I do like the other software for is in-play betting, but that's something else. That's a lot more sort of complex. The other way you can do this is also, you could probably take the Betfair odds, right, to the betting exchange, especially when the market is liquid. Now normally this is quite near the start, and the problem is near the start is when actually the market's the most accurate, because that represents what they will call the closing line. So just bear this in mind. Betfair in play could work to a certain degree. Most of these actual liquidity builders in Betfair are actually tracking the markets in Asia and then providing liquidity. The actual liquidity on Betfair has gone down over the years, so it's not as accurate as it used to be, but it is a possibility. And the actual system that I would suggest to you is actually tracking the pinnacle falling odds. Now, it doesn't even have to be the falling odds. If you can actually find pinnacle sports odds, that are well below what you can see, then just take it, right? You can do that manually. But at the end of the day, it's much easier with the software. And this is where I've really got the ideal software for you. And it's called actually Pinnacle Odds Dropper. So, the name is significant because it actually fills in to what we are looking for. Now, like I say, Pinnacle Sports, they're the sharpest sports book in the world, so they represent the actual market value. And the reason for this is quite simple, because of their liquidity. They've got much more going into their system. They use agents in Asia, and the market is so accurate, it's really worth following. What I like about Pinnacle Odds Dropper is that it notifies you instantly about a change in odds with Pinnacle. And bear in mind, if you're not logged into Pinnacle, you are not seeing the real odds. So this is actually a proper data feed. It's with you in a split second. Secondly, it removes the vigorish, so you get the true odds of what you need to be. So by clicking then onto your sportsbook and finding bigger odds, you have got a value bet. There are settings there to help you. You can choose which sports you're interested in, the bet types. You can also, time to the game, etc. There are so many different methods that you can bring into play. Other reasons, such as the actual drop value, you can see it there instantly before your eyes. You can see if there's professional money going on it, and the liquidity. In this chart that they've got, you can actually see the liquidity. If it's substantial, that means it's a serious betting market and you can get stuck in. So that's one of my favorite things with Pinnacle Odds Dropper. I would definitely suggest that you check it out. It's really a fantastic tool, and there are people there. There's like a 21-year-old, what I would call a kid there. He's actually gone on to make over 100,000 in his first year. He's in the United States. You can do it from anywhere. You've just got to find those value odds. And Pinnacle Odds Dropper are the most accurate purely because they are tracking the sharpest book in the world. So if you want to calculate your advantage, that is simple. So just for example, you've got true odds of 2 and you can actually bet yourself at odds of 210. So what you do is you take the 210 divided by 2 and you've got 1.05. You've got 5% of betting value, EV. If you do it at odds of 220 when the odds are 2, then you've got 10% value. You could do 180 when the odds are 175, then you would have about 3% value. And if you did 3.5 against 3.1, the real odds, then you would have 12.9% value. So it is basically just take the odds that you are getting and divide it by the odds that you have got as a benchmark, and that's how you calculate, your positive EV. Well, I'm a bit reluctant to do it. We should touch on betting banks, right? Because obviously you're all in a different position. It depends where you are in the world. For some people, a couple $100 is a hell of a lot of money, and in other societies like Norway, it wouldn't even probably buy you breakfast. But so if you look into a betting bank, this is what I would definitely suggest. Some comments out there are saying like 4% you should be betting. You should not. You should be betting around 1% of your betting bank. It's going to depend on a little bit of the criteria, but 1% is more than enough. You've got to think about variance, and you've got to try to get numbers into the game. We're going to come on to that in the end section. So, but think betting bank, just be a little bit careful, because you've got to see out. It's got to be long term. Spread your money out through different accounts, and that's going to give you a better chance of actually growing. I'm afraid it's inevitable, but if you're actually profiting from sports betting, then you're going to find that bookmakers, sportsbooks actually close your account, or at least they limit the account. They don't want your liability. So just bear that in mind. You can keep accounts open a little bit longer by doing things like betting nearer the start, because that's closing line value that they actually use to judge the value of the bet isn't really significant at that stage. You could also probably look into betting on top sports, top leagues, where there is real liquidity. And also you should be thinking, stick to the sort of standard bets. Now I know a lot of people say, going to the players markets, you can do if a bookmaker, if a sports book is keen on that, but if they're not, just be a little bit skeptical, because they can get your accounts closed pretty quickly as well. So again, it just depends where you are. Try to figure it out, but keep your accounts open as long as possible. So as we're into the home straight, I want to share with you 12 quick tips. First of all, it's absolutely wrong when people say don't bet parlays. If you've got an advantage and you've got an advantage twice and you put it together, your advantage increases again. So parlays, but only when you have got an advantage. So quantify the advantage, that positive EV, and parlays are fine. I would also suggest that the bigger the margin, the bigger the bet. So especially if it's a series serious sport, and there's liquidity in it. So if you can get over the odds, like big time, then take advantage by all means. Step that up. Don't be betting 1% of your betting bank, sort of maybe stretch it to 2%, but don't go any bigger than that. And also, if your margin's lower, then drop it, sort of probably only 0.5% of what you would normally sort of do, right? So that's another thing. I would also recommend that you don't bet on crap. If you're, say, in the US and you're betting on Romanian handball, then it's probably going to get you flagged pretty quickly. So just use your brain on this one, right? Stick to the stuff that is sort of localized and you'll be fine. Now, if you are going to get in other accounts, just bear in mind, if you're getting them off of friends, getting off of mates, you're going to have to cover your IP, and a VPN's not going to do it, right? Also, you want to be wary that bookmakers can read your who's on your telephone. They can also know, the ID of your computer. So just be wary of that. Put it through a little bit of a system. If you do get to that stage, you've already obviously made money. So invest something in getting the right stuff to avoid detection. If you are using like what I would call an average sort of software, right, to actually find the value bets, then do at least check with a Pinnacle themselves, right, that you're not betting below those. I've actually gone through a lot of these actual sites in the US, and believe me, they're very disappointing. Some of them are actually recommending EV bets when the price, the odds are actually lower than they are on Pinnacle. That is not an EV bet, right? So that's where I suggest with you, Pinnacle Odds Dropper is really your ultimate tool. I would also suggest that, you forget this sort of sport type, just work on everything that you can. It's a numbers game. You've got to get as many bets in the system as possible. Like I said, don't bet on crap, but you can bet on serious stuff. So you can spread it, they've all different time zones, and if it sort of fits in, if it's like top stuff, if it's a really good game, then you can bet it. So you're going to need to stay consistent. A lot of people give up this game. They have like 10 bets, find out 7 of them lost, and all of a sudden they think that they're going to lose money. And I'm afraid it doesn't work like that. You could go to the casino and you could win tonight just by throwing the dice, even though the odds are stacked against you. It does happen, but when you get the odds in your favor, long term, you will profit. If you're on a downturn and you're worried about your sort of betting bank decreasing, then what I would suggest to you is just increase the actual expected EV. So if you had it in like 4%, where you was at least demanding 4% on a bet, then take it to 6%, take it to 7%, take it to what you feel comfortable. It's your game, you choose what to do. I would also recommend that you don't cash out a bet. Now, some actually swear that it's a good thing to do, but if you are cashing out a bet, you are giving value back. So that's just like a chicken's way of running, and we don't do that in value betting unless, of course, you can get better value. But then again, it's just another bet, isn't it, to that stage? This one annoys me. Forget the superstition, right? I heard a stupid guy the other day. He calls himself a professional gambler. He said, people joined when they had like 15 winners on the bounce, and all of a sudden they had like 3 losers, right? So they shouldn't have been joining after that. But it doesn't matter when you join, because at the end of the day, if you're taking a tipster on board and you think that they're profitable, right, it doesn't matter what happened in the past, right? They could be at 14, 15, 16, 17 winners. It really doesn't matter, right? That's just pure, utter superstition, salute magpies, so to say, right? So just bear that in mind. I would also recommend that if you are profiting, do not ask for a payment from a sportsbook. If you do ask for the payment, right, then I'm afraid you're going to flag yourself. They're going to check your account, especially if it's the first payment, and they're going to see that you're winning. They're going to see the type of bets that you place. So you are shooting yourself literally in the foot. Yeah, and the other thing is, of course, use the compounded interest method. Now, don't do this every day. Don't just raise your stakes according to actually how much money you've got. Maybe consider every couple of months reflecting on what you've got in the betting bank and starting again. You could increase your stakes, you could decrease your stakes, but compounded interest, we know what that equates to. It equates to massive profits at the end of the day. And on that note, just one thing I want to pick up on is that we do have a mentorship program for the right people. If you are really keen on fast tracking yourself to the next level, then you should consider checking out our mentorship program, because I know more about betting than the rest of them put together, and I can take you on your journey if you are serious, right? It does come at a cost, I must say, but it is a great investment. So invest in yourself, check out our mentorship program. So that's a wrap. I genuinely hope that you get something from this video. If you go through it again and again, you will see points that you probably didn't spot before, right? So even if you're like already profiting and you want to get bigger and you want to get more serious, just consider going through this. And also check out our other videos. And you can also check out the video that we did on Pinnacle Odds Dropper, which is going to show you how the system works, right? It's very important because I believe that is one of the best systems out there for you, helping you profit. And it's also at the low ebb of the price range, right? So again, beneficial, right? So check out Pinnacle Odds Dropper. We'll see you in the next one soon. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. See you then. Bye-bye.